The forest smelled like blood and smoke. I ran. I didn't look back, because looking back meant seeing what was left of my pack's border camp. What was left of the 3 warriors who had stood between me and the blackthorn wolves. There was nothing left. I ran barefoot through the undergrowth, thorns slicing into my feet, branches whipping across my face. My lungs burned. My wolf, the part of me that should have been able to fight, should have been able to shift and defend herself, was too exhausted, too depleted from 3 days without food or sleep. I was a silvercrest wolf. We didn't run. But I ran that night. Because surviving matters more than pride. My mother told me that once, years ago, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. She said it like it was a secret. Like the elders would have punished her for saying it out loud. Survive first. Everything else is secondary. I didn't know then what she meant. I understood now. The blackthorn wolves had been hunting our borders for weeks. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't random aggression. It was systematic, calculated, the kind of territorial pressure that meant someone was building toward something. A war that had been simmering for 20 years between our packs was finally reaching its boiling point. And I was running straight into blackthorn territory. I knew it. I could feel the change in the air, the shift in scent that marked their land. Damp earth and pine resin and something darker underneath. Something that made my wolf whine low in my chest. Turn back, she whispered. There's nothing to go back to, I told her. I kept running. The trees thinned ahead. A ridge. A drop into darkness below. I slowed, gasping, pressing myself against the bark of a wide oak. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Behind me. Heavy. Deliberate. Not chasing, tracking. There's a difference. Chasing is panic. Tracking is patience. Whoever was behind me wasn't afraid of losing me. They knew exactly where I was going. I pressed my back to the oak and tried to slow my breathing, tried to make myself small, tried to think past the hammering of my heartbeat. A twig snapped. Close. Too close. And then a voice, low, deep, with the kind of control that comes not from calm but from absolute authority, said, "You're bleeding on my land." I turned. He stepped out of the shadows like he'd been made from them. Tall. Dark. Eyes that caught the moonlight and held it, pale silver, almost white. The kind of eyes that belong to an alpha who has never once doubted his right to stand exactly where he stands. Cale Blackthorn. I knew his face. I'd studied it from intelligence reports, from photographs, from the descriptions whispered in fearful voices at Silvercrest pack meetings. Ruthless. That was the word they always used first. Brilliant. That was second. Dangerous. That was the one that came with a pause after it. He looked at me, looked through me it felt like, and something shifted in his expression. Something I couldn't name. Something that made my wolf go utterly, completely still. Silvercrest, he said. Not a question. Let me go, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was proud of that. His eyes dropped to my feet. The blood. The cuts. He tracked upward, my torn clothing, the bruise forming along my jaw from where I'd been thrown against a tree during the attack, the way I was bracing my left arm against my ribs. Something crossed his face. Not pity. Not cruelty. Something more complicated than either. 3 Blackthorn scouts died tonight, he said. At the south border. That wasn't. I stopped. Breathed. That wasn't me. I know. He tilted his head slightly. It was your packmates. Before they were taken. Taken. The word hit me like ice water. How many? I whispered. 6 Silvercrest. Alive. For now. He paused. Your alpha will negotiate. Or he won't. That's not your problem tonight. Not my problem. Tonight, he repeated, quieter this time. Tonight, your problem is that you're standing in my territory, injured, alone, and 3 of my more aggressive warriors are about 20 minutes behind me on this same trail. I stared at him. He stared back. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because, he said, and something in those silver eyes flickered. Something almost human, almost warm before it shuttered closed. My mother was a Silvercrest wolf. The silence between us stretched like a wire pulled too tight. I didn't know that. No one had told me that. And in that moment, standing on the edge of his territory, bleeding, exhausted, with enemies behind me and the biggest enemy of all standing directly in front of me, I made the choice that would destroy everything I'd ever known. I said, "Help me." And Cale Blackthorn, the ruthless alpha I'd been trained to fear and hate since I could walk, said yes. What happened in the hours that followed was not supposed to happen. It was survival. That's what I told myself. It was only survival. I was wrong. Chapter 1. 3 months later. Silvercrest Packlands smelled like home. Pine sap and river water and the faint trace of my grandmother's lavender sachets that she hung in the trees along the western path. I'd grown up with that smell woven into my earliest memories. Now it made my stomach turn. I stood at the edge of the market square, the heart of Silvercrest territory, and watched my packmates move through their morning routines. Children chasing each other between the stalls. Elders drinking tea on the communal porch. Warriors returning from the night patrol, laughing about something I couldn't hear. Normal. Easy. Safe. I used to belong here. My name is Sarah Vane. I'm 23 years old, a mid-rank tracker for the Silvercrest Pack, the daughter of a respected elder, and for the past 3 months, I had been lying to every single person I loved. "You're doing it again," said a voice beside me. I glanced sideways. Mira, my best friend since we were 7 years old, all freckles and flyaway red hair and the ability to read me with terrifying accuracy, was watching me with narrowed eyes. "Doing what?" I said. "The stare," she said. "The one where you look at everything like you're saying goodbye to it." My chest tightened. "I'm just tired," I said. Mira made a sound that meant she didn't believe me but was choosing not to push. Yet, Myra's patience was not infinite. It was actually quite short. She would push. "Just not yet." "Pack meeting tonight," she said instead, falling into step beside me as I moved toward the path home. "Your father's presenting the new border strategy to the Alpha Council." "I know. Something about reinforcing the South Side. After what happened 3 months ago." She paused. "After you came back." My feet kept moving. Steady. Normal. Inside, something cold curled tight in my chest. After I came back. They thought I'd been captured. Held by the Blackthorn Wolves. They'd even mounted a recovery mission, 3 days into the territory, pulling back only when it became clear that continuing would mean open warfare. And then I'd walked back across the border. Alone. Uninjured, mostly. Wearing borrowed clothes that I'd told them I'd taken from a supply cache. They'd been so relieved to see me alive that no one had looked too closely. No one had asked too many questions. No one had noticed the thing I was hiding. Not yet. I pressed my hand briefly against my stomach, subtle barely emotion, and then dropped it before Mira could see. "Sarah." Mira stopped walking. I stopped too, turning to face her. Her green eyes were searching. "Worried. You've been different since you came back." "I told you. I know what you told me." Her voice was soft, but underneath it was something harder. Something that said, "I'm your friend. Don't lie to me. But I know you. And something is wrong." I looked at her face, the face of the girl who had been my first friend, my closest ally, who had held my hand when my mother died and stayed awake with me through 3 nights of grief, and felt the lie sitting in my throat like a stone. Something is wrong. She had no idea how wrong. "I'm okay," I said quietly. "I promise. I just need time." Mira looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly, and reached out to squeeze my hand. "Okay," she said. "But Sarah, whatever it is, you can tell me." I squeezed back. I smiled. And I thought, no. I really can't. The pack healer's name was Dina, and she had the discretion of a stone wall and the intuition of someone who had been reading bodies for 40 years. She was also the only person in Silvercrest territory I partially trusted right now. I went to her cottage at dusk, when the paths were mostly empty, slipping through the gap in the fence that I'd used as a child when I didn't want to be seen. Dina was waiting. She always seemed to be waiting, as if she knew before you knocked that you were coming. She took one look at me and said, "Sit down." I sat. She brought tea, something herbal, something that smelled green and slightly bitter, and set it in front of me before settling into the chair across the small table. 3 months, she said. 8 weeks confirmed, I said. Give or take. Her eyes were calm. Not surprised. Not horrified. That calmness was the only reason I didn't fall apart. You know what this means, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. For you personally. For your standing in the pack. She paused. For the child. Yes. The word came out smaller that time. Does the father? No. Fast. Firm. Too firm. Dina studied me. Does he know? I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and didn't answer. Because the answer was, no. And he can't. Because if Cale Blackthorn finds out I'm carrying his child, if either pack finds out, this fragile, terrible, brittle piece that is the only thing standing between 200 wolves and an open war will shatter. Sarah, Dina said gently. I need you to help me figure out how to keep this quiet, I said. For as long as possible. Dina was silent for a long moment. Then, there are options. I know. I met her eyes. And I've thought about all of them. I had. Every night for the past 3 months. I'd thought about every option with the cold, systematic thoroughness of a tracker doing a threat assessment. And every time I reached the end of the analysis, I came back to the same place. I couldn't. I didn't fully understand why. I wasn't certain whether it was fear or instinct or something else. Something that my wolf understood better than my rational mind did. But every time I tried to make a decision that didn't involve keeping this pregnancy, something in me went quiet and still and absolutely immovable. Like a door that had already closed. Like a choice that had already been made. Then you're going to need to tell someone, Dina said. Not yet. Sarah. Not yet, I said again, quiet and certain. I just need a little more time to figure out how. Dina looked at me for a long, searching moment. Then she nodded. I'll keep your confidence, she said. For now. But child, time has a way of making its own decisions. She was right. I just didn't know how little time I actually had left. The pack meeting that night was held in the Alpha's longhouse, a wide open space that smelled of cedar and packed earth and the collective warmth of 200 wolves gathered in one place. Alpha Dorian stood at the front. He was a large man, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had been carved by decades of hard decisions. He'd led the Silvercrest pack for 30 years. He'd maintained the uneasy peace with the Blackthorns through sheer political will and a policy of quiet, strategic pressure. I had respected him my entire life. I stood at the back of the gathering and tried to look like a normal packmate listening to a normal meeting. The south border will be reinforced, my father was saying. He stood beside Alpha Dorian, his maps spread on the long table. Additional sentinel posts. Rotating watch teams. We cannot allow another incursion like the one 3 months ago. Murmurs of agreement through the crowd. I kept my breathing even. Intelligence suggests the Blackthorns are consolidating, my father continued. Moving wolves from their eastern territories inward. Centralizing their strength. Preparing for war, someone said from the middle of the crowd. We don't know that, Alpha Dorian said, steady and controlled. Then what are they preparing for? The question hung in the air. And my father said, very quietly, we believe they may be searching for something. Searching. A cold finger pressed against the base of my spine. Or someone, said another voice. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. There have been reports, my father said carefully, of Blackthorn scouts crossing the border on foot. Small groups. Not raiders. Trackers. He paused. They're following a specific trail. Alpha Dorian looked out over the gathered wolves. We don't know what, or who they're looking for, he said. But we intend to find out. I slipped out the back of the longhouse before the meeting ended. I made it 15 steps into the dark before my knees gave out. I caught myself against a pine tree, pressing my forehead to the rough bark, breathing hard through my nose. They're looking for someone. Cale. Cale was sending trackers. and there were only so many things he could be looking for. I pressed my hand against my stomach and felt, for the first time, faintly, like the brush of a butterfly wing, the tiniest flutter of movement. "I know," I whispered. "I know." The night pressed in around me, cold and close and full of secrets. And somewhere, on the other side of the border, a silver-eyed alpha was looking for me. Chapter 2. The morning after the pack meeting, I made a mistake. I ran into Cale Darren at the Eastern Well. Cale was the pack's beta, my father's protégé, and the man that half the pack expected me to mate with someday. He was handsome in an obvious, deliberate way, broad-shouldered, dark-eyed, always dressed like he was about to receive an important delegation. He was also the most observant wolf in the Silvercrest pack. More observant than my father. More observant than Alpha Dorian. Almost as observant as me. "Sarah," he said, smiling as I approached the well. "You're out early." "Couldn't sleep." He stepped aside to let me fill my bucket, but he didn't walk away. He never simply walked away from a conversation. Every exchange with Cale was a subtle negotiation. "How are you feeling? You've seemed different lately." "So everyone keeps telling me," I said lightly. "Your scent has changed." The words landed like stones. I didn't pause. I kept my hands steady on the bucket. I turned the handle at an even pace. "Could be diet," I said. "Healer put me on a different tea." It wasn't a complete lie. Dina had given me tea. Cale was quiet for a moment. I could feel his attention on me like a physical weight, that careful, cataloging focus that made him excellent at his job and deeply uncomfortable to be around when you were hiding something. "Sarah." His voice shifted. Lower. Less casual. "I need to tell you something." I turned to face him. His expression had changed. The easy smile was gone. In its place was something that looked uncomfortably like concern. "There's a rumor," he said quietly, "among the elders, about why the Blackthorn Scouts are crossing the border." My pulse stayed steady. I trained for this. Years of tracking and surveillance work had given me the ability to control my outward responses even when everything inside me was screaming. "What rumor?" I said. "That when you were held by the Blackthorns," he stopped. Started again. "That what happened wasn't a capture." The morning birds were very loud suddenly. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," Cale said very carefully, "that some of the elders are starting to ask whether you were held against your will. Or whether you stayed." I held his gaze. "I was held," I said. "And then I escaped." Cale looked at me for a long, quiet moment. "Okay," he said. But his eyes said something different. His eyes said, "I'm watching. And my nose is very, very good." He picked up his own bucket and walked away. I stood at the well and counted my remaining days of invisibility. They were shrinking. That night, I went to the border. I didn't plan to. My feet made the decision before my brain agreed to it. One moment I was lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling and cataloging threats. The next I was moving through the trees in the dark, heading south, heading toward the one place I absolutely should not be going. The Blackthorn border. It was marked with stones, smooth dark river rocks placed at intervals, easy to miss in daylight, impossible to miss in moonlight. Their territory began there. Their laws, their authority, their right to deal with intruders however their alpha decided. I stopped 6 feet from the first stone. And stood there. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I expected. Him to appear? "That's exactly what you're expecting," my wolf said, with the particular dry precision she reserved for my worst impulses. "Shut up," I murmured. "You're standing at the border in the middle of the night. You're not here for the ambience. I needed air." "You needed," she paused. Then, quieter, "you needed to be close to something that doesn't feel like a lie." That stopped me. Because she wasn't wrong. 3 months of lying. 3 months of carrying this secret like a wound that couldn't close because I couldn't stop reopening it in my own mind. Every time I thought about that night, really thought about it, not the sanitized version I'd constructed for Mira and my father and the Alpha Council, but the real version, I felt something that I absolutely could not afford to feel. Not guilt. I'd expected guilt. Guilt would have been manageable. Something warmer than guilt. Something that had no place between a silvercrest wolf and a blackthorn alpha. The wind shifted. And then his scent hit me. Dark pine. Rain on stone. Something underneath that, something warm and complex that my wolf recognized before my brain caught up. I spun around. He was standing 10 feet behind me. Not at the border. Not on his side. On mine. Cale Blackthorn was standing in Silvercrest territory, arms crossed, silver eyes watching me with that expression I couldn't name, the one that was too controlled to be called anything, that gave nothing away and somehow communicated everything. "You're on my land," I said. My voice was steady. "Good. Yes," he said. "That's a declaration of hostility." "I'm alone and unarmed," he said. "Try again." "It's still a violation." "Sarah." He said my name like he'd been saying it for years. Like it belonged to him. My wolf made a sound deep in my chest that I immediately suppressed. "How long have you been tracking me?" I asked. "Long enough." He tilted his head slightly. "Are you going to keep pretending you didn't come here hoping I'd find you?" "I came here for air." "You came here at midnight. To the border." His eyes held mine. "You came here because you can't stop thinking about it either." "I need you to go back to your side," I said. "No. Just no. Simple. Absolute." With the kind of finality that had probably ended a dozen negotiations and never once bothered him. "Cale. My scouts have been crossing your border for 3 weeks," he said. "Do you know what they're looking for?" My heart was very loud. "I can guess," I said carefully. "Then you know this ends one of 2 ways." He uncrossed his arms. Took 1 step forward. "Either you come back with me, or I tell your Alpha Council what I know." The cold settled deep in my bones. "You don't know anything," I said. He looked at me. And then his gaze dropped, just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, to my midsection. And back up. Those silver eyes held something now. Something that made my chest crack open just slightly. "I know everything," he said quietly. "I've known for 6 weeks." The world tilted. 6 weeks. He'd known for 6 weeks. Which meant he'd waited. He'd sent scouts, not to expose me, not to drag me back, not to use this against my pack. He'd sent scouts to find me. "Why didn't you come to you immediately?" He stepped closer. 3 feet now. Near enough that his scent surrounded me, near enough that my wolf was doing something complicated and urgent that I was doing my best to ignore. "Because I needed to know if you were safe." "I'm fine." "You're not," he said simply. "You're alone with this. And your pack is days away from figuring it out without you." He paused. "And I'm not going to let you face that alone." "You don't let me do anything," I said. "I make my own choices." "I know." Something crossed his face, something that looked in the moonlight, almost like pain. "The same way you made the choice 3 months ago." Silence. The trees around us were very still. "That was survival," I said. The words tasted like ash. "You know that." "I know what you told yourself," he said. "I also know what it was." My throat was very tight. "Cale." His name came out softer than I intended. "What do you want?" He looked at me for a long moment. "To bring you home," he said. And that single, impossible, devastating sentence, was the moment I understood that my carefully constructed plan of managing this alone, of buying time, of finding some way to navigate between 2 packs and 1 enormous secret, was already over. Because he hadn't said back to Blackthorn territory. He'd said home. And my wolf, treacherous creature that she was, knew exactly what he meant. Chapter 3. I told him to leave. He did. But he left something behind, a folded piece of paper, pressed into my hand so quickly I didn't register the touch until after he'd stepped back into the shadows. I didn't open it until I was back in my room, door locked, curtains drawn. It contained 5 words. 3 days. Then I come. I burned it over the small candle on my windowsill and watched the ash scatter. 3 days. He was giving me 3 days to come to him willingly before he forced the issue. The move had Kale written all over it. Not aggressive, not passive, but something in between. A line drawn with precision. A deadline that was a warning and an offer at the same time. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I had not let myself think about for 3 months. The night I'd sheltered in his territory. The night that had started as survival and had become something I didn't have words for. He had not forced anything. That was important. That was the thing I circled back to every time I tried to examine it with cold clarity. Nothing that night had been coercion. He had offered shelter. Safety. The warmth of his fire and the steadiness of his presence and the unexpected gentleness of someone who was supposed to be a monster but was, in truth, just a man who carried a great deal of weight and carried it quietly. We had talked for hours first. I hadn't expected that. He'd asked about my mother, the Silvercrest wolf who had been his own mother's cousin, some thread of distant blood connection that made the enmity between our packs a little more absurd and a great deal more painful. He'd told me about the war. Not the Blackthorn version. Not the propaganda. The real story, the misunderstanding 20 years ago that had calcified into hatred, the leaders on both sides who had more interest in maintaining conflict than in resolving it, the wolves on both sides who wanted peace and had no voice. And at some point, I couldn't mark the exact moment, couldn't point to the second it crossed from talking to something else, the distance between us had closed. And I had let it close. And now I was here. 3 months later. 3 days of grace. I pressed my hands over my face and breathed. Think, I told myself. Think like a tracker. Not like someone who can't stop remembering what his hands felt like. Options. 1. Go to Kale. Enter Blackthorn territory. Accept whatever claim he intended to make. Consequences. Immediate exile from Silvercrest. Possible declaration of war. My father's heart, broken. 2. Tell my Alpha Council the truth. All of it. Control the narrative before Kale forced it. Consequences. Unpredictable. Alpha Dorian was pragmatic but not immune to pride. The elders were less pragmatic and deeply immune to anything that threatened pack honor. 3. Run. Neither pack. Rogue territory. Alone. I put my hand against my stomach. Alone. No, my wolf said quietly. She was right. Running wasn't really an option. Not now. Maybe not ever. Which meant I had 3 days to find a fourth option that didn't exist yet. I closed my eyes. And almost immediately fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. My father found me at breakfast. He was a tall man, my father. Lean where Kale was broad, quiet where the Alpha was commanding. He had my same dark hair and a healer's hands, though he'd never trained as one. He was an elder by reputation, a strategist by gift, and the person I had spent my entire life trying to make proud. He set a cup of tea on the table in front of me and sat down. I want to talk about the meeting, he said. Okay, I said. There were some concerns raised afterward. Among the senior elders. He wrapped his hands around his own cup. About the scouts. About what they're searching for. I heard. My voice was even. Sarah. He used the tone. The quiet one. The one he'd always reserved for serious conversations. The one that meant he'd already thought about this for a long time before bringing it to me. There are whispers. About the nature of your capture. I looked at him. He looked back. My father had the kindest eyes I knew. Right now they held something that wasn't kindness and wasn't anger and was somehow harder than both. It was grief, I realized. He already suspected. Not everything, not the specific truth, but enough. The way a parent knows the shape of something wrong before they have the details to fill it in. Dad, I started. I need you to tell me, he said, that whatever the elders are beginning to suspect, whatever the Blackthorn scouts are looking for, it isn't what I'm afraid it is. The silence in the kitchen was very complete. I thought about lying. I was very good at it. I'd been doing it for 3 months. But this was my father. And I was so tired. I can't tell you that, I said. The words fell between us like something dropped from a great height. My father's face didn't crumple. He wasn't that kind of man. He absorbed it. I watched him absorb it, watched something shift in his expression, watched him reorganize himself around this new weight. He was quiet for a very long time. "How far along?" he said finally. 8 weeks, I said. Then, quietly, "Give or take." He nodded slowly. "The father," he said. "It's..." "Yes," I said. His jaw tightened. "Once." Then released. "Does he know?" "He found out." I paused. 6 weeks ago." My father looked at me. 6 weeks, he said. "And he hasn't used it?" "No." Another silence. "That tells you something," my father said. "I know." "What it tells the elders," he continued carefully, "is a different thing entirely." I nodded. "I know that too." My father rose from the table. He carried his cup to the window and stood there, looking out at the packlands, at the world he'd shaped his entire life around protecting. "We have perhaps 2 days," he said, "before the senior elders bring this to Alpha Dorian directly." 2 days. Kale had given me 3. The numbers sat together in my mind and felt like the ticking of a clock. "Dad." I stood, cross to him, stood beside him at the window. "I don't know how to fix this." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and put his arm around my shoulders. The way he had when I was small, when the world was smaller, when problems had solutions you could see from where you were standing. "I do," he said. I looked up at him. His expression was not easy. It was not comfortable. But it was decided. "You need to go to him," he said. I stopped breathing. "Dad." "Not to surrender. Not to choose them over us." He kept his eyes on the window. "But to negotiate. Before the elders force a confrontation that no one, on either side, can walk back from. Alpha Dorian would never." "Alpha Dorian is a good leader," my father said. "But he is not immune to the elders." "And the elders," he paused. "The elders already voted, Sarah. Last night, after the meeting." My blood went cold. "Voted on what?" I said. My father turned to look at me. "On whether to use you," he said quietly, "as a bargaining piece." The word hit me like a blow. "Peace." "They want to offer me to the Blackthorns," I said slowly. As leverage. As a symbol." His voice was steady, but I could hear what was underneath it. The quiet, contained fury of a father who had sat in that room last night and had not been able to stop what was happening. They see the pregnancy, once it becomes public, as something they can use. Evidence of Blackthorn aggression. Ammunition for diplomatic pressure. "They're going to use my child as a political weapon," I said. My father said nothing. Because the answer was yes. The elders of my pack, the people I'd grown up respecting, the leaders I'd been taught to trust, were going to take the most vulnerable thing in my life and turn it into a tool. And the only person standing between that plan and everything it would cost was the enemy Alpha, who was giving me 3 days. Who already knew. Who had known for 6 weeks and said nothing. Who had come to my border at midnight, alone and unarmed, to ask me to come home. Come home. I felt my wolf settle deep in my chest. Quiet. Certain. "I need to get a message to him," I said. My father nodded once. "I know someone who can carry it," he said. "Someone the Blackthorn scouts will recognize as a safe passage signal." I looked at my father, this man who had given his life to a pack that was now using his daughter as a chess piece, and felt something that was more complicated than love and older than loyalty. "Dad," I said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. He squeezed my shoulder once. "Be smart," he said. "Be careful." He paused. "And Sarah," his voice dropped to something very quiet. "Whatever you decide about him. About that side of it. Make sure it's your choice. Not the pack's. Not his." A pause. "Yours." I nodded. And for the first time in 3 months, I felt something that wasn't fear or guilt or the exhausting weight of secrecy. I felt something that might eventually become a plan. The message I sent was simpler than his. 4 words. "Come tonight. Bring no one." I sent it with my father's contact, an old female wolf named Bessa who had traded goods across the border for 40 years and who had, apparently, been quietly maintaining back-channel communications between the packs for most of that time. That was a discovery for another day. Tonight I stood at the border stones, waiting. The moon was 3/4 full. The night was cold and clear. And my wolf was so alert and still that it felt like she was holding her breath. He came exactly at midnight. Alone. He stepped out of the trees and looked at me across the stones, and even in moonlight I could see that he'd come straight, no hesitation, no delay. He'd started moving the moment my message arrived. Something about that did something to my chest. "You came," I said. "You asked me not to bring anyone," he said. I thought about it for about 30 seconds and then I left. There was something almost dry in his voice. Almost wry. It was so unlike the image of him I'd carried for years, the ruthless alpha, the cold strategist, that it stopped me every time I encountered it. He stepped over the border stones without pause. No announcement. No aggression. Just, over. "The elders voted," I said, "to use the pregnancy as a political tool. They're planning to go public with it in a way that frames it as Blackthorn aggression. Evidence you forced." I stopped. His expression shifted. Something darkened in it. "They would do that," he said quietly. "To you." "To the child," I said. "And yes, they would." Kale was quiet for a moment. Then, "Come with me tonight." "I can't just." "Not permanently. Not yet." He stepped closer. One step. "Just, come across. Talk to my beta. My inner circle. Let me show you what I have on my side of this before you decide anything." "That's how a trap sounds," I said. "You know it isn't," he said. He was right. I did know. That was the problem with Kale Blackthorn. He was exactly what he appeared to be, which was something I had absolutely no framework for. "If I cross that border," I said slowly, "I'm choosing you. My pack will see it that way." "Your pack," he said carefully, "is already moving against you." "My father isn't." "No." Something soft moved through his expression. "No, he isn't." "He said to make sure it was my choice," I said. "Not the pack's. Not yours." Kale nodded. He stepped back. One step. Giving me space. "Then it's your choice," he said simply. "I'm not going to push you across that line." I looked at the border stones. I looked at him. And then I looked at the Silvercrest tree line behind me, at the home I'd grown up in, the pack that was already meeting without me, already deciding what to do with me, already reducing me to a piece in a game I hadn't agreed to play. My wolf was very still. Very certain. I stepped over the border stones. And Kale Blackthorn exhaled, just once, just a small release of breath, like he'd been holding it since midnight 3 months ago. "Okay," I said. "Show me what you have." He nodded. And we walked into the dark together. With the border stones behind us. And everything still ahead. She crossed the border. But crossing a line is not the same as choosing a side. And the choice she still had to make, the real one, the one that couldn't be taken back, was coming faster than either of them knew. Chapter 4. Blackthorn territory looked nothing like I'd imagined. I'd built a picture of it over years, from intelligence reports, from the descriptions of warriors who'd crossed the border on raids, from the general portrait that fear paints when it has too much time and too little information. I'd imagined something darker. Harder. A pack that matched its reputation. What I found instead was a village. Not so different from ours. Children's shoes lined up outside a longhouse door. Firelight in windows. The smell of something cooking. Something rich and herbed that made my stomach respond before my brain could override it. A pair of old wolves sitting on a bench by the main path, deep in quiet conversation, their breath misting in the cold night air. Normal. Achingly, uncomfortably normal. "You expected something different," Kale said. He wasn't looking at me. He was scanning the path ahead with the automatic vigilance of an alpha in his own territory, but he'd felt my reaction somehow. Read it without seeing it. "A little," I admitted. "Fear is an effective storyteller," he said. We moved through the settlement quickly. He was keeping to the outer paths, not hiding me exactly, but managing the exposure. Not everyone needed to see this tonight. The few wolves we passed looked. Of course they looked. A stranger in their territory at midnight, moving with their alpha. They looked. But none of them challenged. None of them moved aggressively. They deferred to Kale with the ease of a pack that trusted its leader completely, and in that trust, they extended a kind of provisional tolerance to whatever he brought among them. That told me more about him than anything else could have. A pack reflects its alpha. What I was seeing reflected someone fair. He brought me to a building at the settlement's edge. Larger than the others, solid stone with a wide porch and a door made of heavy dark wood. Not a display of wealth. A display of permanence. This had been standing for generations. Inside, warm. A long central room with a fireplace wide enough to walk into, heavy furniture, shelves dense with books and maps and the accumulated documentation of a pack's history. A table large enough for 20. And 3 people waiting. I stopped just inside the door. The 3 wolves at the table rose, not defensively, but with the careful, deliberate courtesy of people who had been briefed and were trying very hard to get this right. Sarah Vane, Kale said. My beta, Joran. My head of pack welfare, Lisa. And my chief strategist, Damon. Joran was large and quiet-eyed, not unlike Kale, my own pack's beta, but without Kale's watchful calculation. Joran's steadiness felt different. Settled. Lisa was a small woman, older, with healer's hands and a healer's gaze. The kind that took inventory without being invasive. Damon was young. Younger than I'd expected for a chief strategist. Maybe 26, 27, with sharp eyes and a notebook already open in front of him. Thank you for coming, Lisa said. The words were so simply meant that they disarmed me before I could decide whether to be disarmed. I almost didn't, I said honestly. We know, Joran said. We appreciate the almost as much as the actually. Something in me loosened, slightly, against my will. Kale gestured to the table. We sat, him at the head, which was natural and unperformed. Me to his left, which placed me in the seat that, in pack tradition, was reserved for someone trusted. I noticed. I filed it away. Tell me what you know, I said. About the war. Your version. All of it. Damon opened his notebook. And they told me. It took 2 hours. By the end, my tea had gone cold and untouched. The fire had burned lower. And the picture I'd carried of this conflict, the one I'd been given by my pack, the one I'd accepted without enough examination, had been fundamentally altered. Not reversed. Not replaced. Complicated. 20 years ago, a Silvercrest hunting party had crossed into Blackthorn territory during a hard winter. They'd claimed it was accidental. The Blackthorns had lost 3 wolves in the confrontation that followed, including Kale's uncle. The Silvercrest pack's version, the Blackthorns attacked without cause. The truth, as Damon laid it out with maps and dated documents and testimony records, was Messier. The hunting party had been carrying Silvercrest weapons modified to look like standard tools. It was likely a probe. A test of Blackthorn response time and border security. It had escalated because the Blackthorn wolves defending the border had been young and frightened and the Silvercrest hunters had not de-escalated. 3 dead. And 20 years of war that grew around those 3 deaths like a forest around a wound. Why didn't you bring this forward? I asked. To a neutral mediator. The Mountain Council. Anyone. We tried, Lisa said quietly. Damon slid a document across the table. I looked at it. A formal request for neutral arbitration. Dated 15 years ago. With the Silvercrest Alpha's signature at the bottom, Alpha Dorian's signature. And a rejection stamp. My stomach dropped. He refused arbitration, I said. 3 times, Kale said. He said it without triumph. Without bitterness. Just fact. The flatness of someone who had been angry about something for so long that the anger had turned into something quieter and colder. Because arbitration would have required Silvercrest to acknowledge what the hunting party was doing on our land. Dorian would have lost face, I said slowly. His elders would have forced him to respond to the loss of face, Kale said. And he values his position. A pause. He's not a bad leader. He's a political one. There's a difference. I thought about my alpha. the man I'd respected for 23 years. I thought about the vote. About using me as a piece. What do you want? I asked. What does Blackthorn actually want from all of this? Cale looked at me steadily. The same thing we've always wanted, he said. A formal agreement. Defined borders. An end to the patrol skirmishes and the proxy conflicts and the 20 years of bleeding. He paused. And now, something shifted in his voice. A guarantee of safety for you. And the child. The fire popped and settled. I looked at him. In that order? I asked. No, he said simply. The word hung in the air between us. Joran cleared his throat softly. He and Lisa and Damon had been very carefully studying the table for the last 30 seconds. We should give you both a moment, Lisa said, rising with the smooth discretion of someone very practiced at exits. They were out the door in under a minute. And then it was just Cale and me and the low fire. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. That was perhaps the most unsettling thing about it. Cale rose from his chair and moved to the fireplace, crouching to add a log from the stack beside it. He did it with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Nothing performative about it, nothing designed to be watched. Just a man keeping a fire alive. You're afraid, he said. Not accusingly. Observationally. I'm practical, I said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No. I watched the fire catch the new log. But I prefer to think of it as practical. He made a quiet sound. Almost, a laugh. 3 months ago, I said. That night. I stopped. He waited. I told myself it was survival, I said. That I was bargaining. In the most immediate sense. Shelter, safety, warmth. I know what you told yourself, he said. Was I wrong? He turned to look at me. Firelight on his face now, it did something to him, softened the sharp lines of him, made him look less like the alpha and more like just a person carrying something heavy. Partly, he said. Which part? The part where it was only survival, he said quietly. It was also a choice. Made by someone with full awareness. That matters. It doesn't change what it was between our packs. No, he agreed. But it changes what it is between us. I pressed my hands flat against the table. You said you wanted to bring me home, I said. What does that mean? Exactly. No metaphor. He was quiet for a moment. It means I want you here, he said. Safe. With access to resources, to support to, he stopped. Began again. It means I'm not going to pretend this child is a political complication. It's mine. He stopped again. Something moved through his jaw. A tightening. You matter. To me. Outside of what you carry. The words were careful. Deliberate. Not a declaration. An admission. There's a difference. You don't know me, I said. I know more than you think, he said. And I want to know the rest. I looked at him, really looked, the way I'd been avoiding for 3 months because looking led to remembering and remembering led to the thing I couldn't afford to feel. I'm not going to perform gratitude, I said. I won't be a trophy. Not for your pack, not as proof of conquest, not as... I know, he said. Quiet. Firm. I've never wanted that. Then what do you want? From me. Specifically. He crossed back to the table. Didn't sit, stood at the edge of it, hands resting on the surface, close enough that I could catch his scent clearly. Dark pine and rain and that warm undercurrent that my wolf absolutely refused to ignore. I want you to stay, he said. Here. Where I can keep you safe while we figure out the rest. And if I can't? Then tell me what you need, he said, and I'll make it happen. I looked at him. He looked back. And something in me, something that had been wound tight for 3 months, something that had been performing steadiness for so long it had nearly convinced even me, slowly, carefully began to release. I need to see my father again, I said. Before anything is decided. Done, he said immediately. I need your pack to understand that I'm not surrendering. I'm not a mate claim unless I choose it. Understood, he said. And I stopped. Swallowed. I need you to be honest with me. About everything. Even when it's something you think I won't want to hear. He held my gaze. That, he said, is the easiest thing you've asked. I exhaled slowly. Then I'll stay, I said. For now. 1 week. And we talk. Properly. About all of it. Something crossed his face. Fast, controlled, but unmistakable. Relief. Pure, unguarded relief. Gone in a second. But I'd seen it. And my wolf curled quiet and warm in my chest. And neither of us said anything more. But the fire burned bright between us. And it was enough. For tonight. Chapter 5. I woke in a room that didn't smell like home. It smelled like pine resin and the particular coolness of stone walls, and underneath both, the faintest trace of him. Not overwhelming, just present, the way his scent had apparently decided to colonize everything within 50 feet of where he'd been. My wolf noted this with interest. I told her to stop it. The room was small and plainly furnished. A bed with good blankets, a washstand, a window that looked east into the trees. Someone had left a folded set of clothes on the chair. Not a gift, not a statement. Just practicality. My own clothes were torn in 3 places and had been through a midnight border crossing. I dressed. Stood at the window. The Blackthorn settlement woke differently than Silvercrest. Quieter, in some ways. More deliberate. The wolves who moved through the early morning paths did so with a settled, unhurried purpose that spoke of a pack that knew exactly what it was. No performance in it. No one checking to see who was watching. I found that, against my will, I liked it. A soft knock at the door. Come in. Lisa opened the door and leaned against the frame without entering. Respecting the space, I noticed. Deliberate. Breakfast, she said. If you want it. Is it poisoned? I asked. She blinked. Then she laughed, a genuine, startled sound. I like you already, she said. Breakfast was in the main hall, a long room with tables that smelled of the same food I'd noticed the night before. The population of the pack moved through in a comfortable stream. Some of them glanced at me. Most of those glances were curious rather than hostile. A few were cold. I expected that. I noted the faces that held them. Lisa sat across from me. How much did he tell you? I asked. Before last night. Enough, she said. He told us 6 weeks ago. When he confirmed it. How did he confirm it? She tilted her head. Your scent. Apparently he could detect it from, she stopped. From a significant distance. I set down my cup. He was close enough to scent me 6 weeks ago, I said carefully. And he didn't approach. He needed to know you were safe first, Lisa said. He needed to know it wasn't, she paused. That you hadn't been compromised. That the pregnancy wasn't being used against you already. He was protecting my ability to choose, I said slowly. Lisa just looked at me. Like that was obvious. Like of course that's what he'd been doing. Something moved through my chest. He's not what people say, I said. Very few people are, Lisa said. Especially when fear does the writing. She wrapped her hands around her mug. He had a difficult ascension. Young. Lots of challengers. He had to be. A pause. He had to present a particular face to keep the pack stable. The ruthless alpha. The capable one, she corrected gently. There's a difference. His pack doesn't fear him. They trust him. Fear and trust look similar from the outside when someone else is doing the describing. I thought about that. I thought about everything I'd been told about Cale Blackthorn for 23 years. How much of it had been true? How much had been useful? How much of it had served specific people's interests to have me believe? I need to contact my father today, I said. It's already arranged, Lisa said. I looked at her. Cale had a message sent at dawn, she said. Inviting your father to the midpoint boundary, the old shepherd's crossing. Neutral ground. This afternoon. My throat tightened. He didn't ask me first, I said. He thought. I know what he thought, I said. But that's mine to decide. When and how I reconnect with my family. That's not his call. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. You're right. I'll let him know. Where is he? Morning training run. Back in an hour. I pushed back my chair. I'll tell him myself, I said. I found him at the edge of the forest. He was alone. I hadn't expected that. An alpha's morning training usually involved at least a handful of warriors. But Kale was running the tree line solo, and he slowed when he caught my scent, turning to face me as I approached. He was breathing hard. His hair was slightly wild. There was a scratch across his forearm from where he'd apparently gone through a thorn bush at speed. He looked real. In a way that photographs and intelligence reports absolutely failed to capture. You sent a message to my father, I said. He held my gaze. Yes, he said. Without asking me. A pause. I thought it would. I know what you thought, I said. You thought it was practical. Efficient. A kindness. I stopped in front of him. Not close, 3 feet, space enough for clarity. But you made a decision about my family without my input. In my first 12 hours here. He looked at me. Something moved through his expression. Not defensiveness. Something closer to genuine discomfort. You're right, he said. I overstepped. Yes. I'll send a second message, withdrawing the first. Give you control over the timing. I studied him. He held it. No elaboration. No justification. No qualified apology. Just, you're right, I overstepped, I'll fix it. I'd expected defensiveness. I'd prepared for it. I had a whole architecture of responses ready for various forms of justification. His actual response dismantled all of it. Fine, I said. But the meeting with my father, I still want it. This afternoon, if possible. Done, he said. And next time something involves my family or my choices, ask me first. He nodded. Noted. I turned to go. Sarah. I turned back. He was looking at me with that expression again, the complicated one, the one I couldn't catalogue. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Genuinely. I believe you, I said. And I meant it. Which was, I reflected as I walked back to the settlement, the most surprising part of all. The old Shepherd's Crossing was exactly as its name suggested. A wide, flat stone bridge over a narrow river, situated exactly between Silvercrest and Blackthorn territory by geography if not by official designation. My father was already there when I arrived. He was alone. He'd come alone, which meant he'd understood the message even through its complexity. Come without backup, come openly, come as a father and not as a pack elder. He looked older. 3 months older than any person should look in 3 months. I crossed the bridge at a walk. And then he opened his arms and I stopped being 23 years old and a tracker and a woman carrying impossible secrets and became briefly, just his daughter. He held me for a long time without saying anything. I pressed my face against his shoulder and felt something unlock in my chest that I hadn't realized was locked. I'm okay, I said. I'm really okay. I know, he said. I can tell. A pause. You smell steadier than you have in months. I pulled back to look at him. He's not what we were told, I said. My father nodded slowly. I suspected. For a while. You suspected and you didn't. I'm an elder of a pack that doesn't want to know the truth about the war, he said simply. There are limits to what even a father can do inside a system that resists correction. He looked past me toward the Blackthorn side of the bridge. Did he come? He stayed back, I said. Gave us space. My father's expression did something I couldn't quite read. That, he said, is a man who understands that some things matter more than control. Dad. I reached for his hand. The elders, the vote. How long before they move? His jaw tightened. Faster than I'd like. Kale is pushing for disclosure. He's convinced the alpha that going public with the pregnancy, framing it as Blackthorn aggression, is the best diplomatic leverage we've had in a decade. Kale. Of course it was Kale. He suspects the truth, I said. That it wasn't aggression. Yes, my father said. Which is precisely why he wants to move before you can tell your version. If Silvercrest goes public with a false account, Kale would have grounds for war, my father finished. Yes. And unlike the last 20 years of skirmishing, it would be a just one. He looked at me. Which is why Kale is brilliant and terrifying and wrong. I need time, I said, to find a third option. There may not be. There's always a third option, I said. That's what you taught me. He was quiet. Then he smiled, small, exhausted, real. I taught you well, he said. You did. I squeezed his hand. Which is why I need you to go back to the pack and buy me 48 hours. Without letting Kale know what you're doing. My father raised an eyebrow. And what will you be doing in 48 hours? He asked. I took a breath. I'm going to find evidence, I said. Real evidence. The kind that makes a false account impossible. The kind that forces both packs to the table without anyone being able to manufacture a narrative. My father looked at me for a long moment. The archives, he said slowly. Blackthorn has the original arbitration documents, I said. And I think there's more. I think there's a record of those communications that goes deeper than what Damon showed me last night. I need to find the full picture. If you bring that kind of evidence forward, he stopped. Sarah, that's not a neutral act. That looks like you choosing Blackthorn. No, I said. It looks like I'm choosing the truth. The river ran quietly beneath us. A bird called somewhere in the trees. My father looked at me, at his daughter who had somehow grown entirely new in the past 3 months, and nodded. 48 hours, he said. I'll do what I can. He held my hand for another moment, then released it, and we walked back to our separate sides. Kale was waiting at the edge of the Blackthorn path, far enough to have given us privacy. Close enough that I understood he'd been watching, not intrusively, but in the way of someone who cannot turn off the vigilance entirely, who is always simultaneously the alpha and the man. Good? He asked. Good, I said. He fell into step beside me as we walked back. We walked in silence for a moment. Then, what do you need? He said. Your archives, I said. The full ones. Everything Damon showed me last night was curated. He stopped walking. I stopped too. It was accurate, he said carefully. I know. But it was selected. I met his eyes. There's more. Information that might not make your pack look entirely clean either. And I need all of it. He held my gaze. He was thinking. I could see it, the internal calculation, the alpha considering exposure and risk and trust. If there's something in those archives that complicates Blackthorn's position, he said slowly, you could use it. I know, I said. But you're asking for it anyway. I told you what I needed from you, I said. Honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. The forest was very quiet around us. Something shifted in his expression. Something that broke through the control and the calculation and reached for something more fundamental. Okay, he said. One word. But the way he said it. Okay. Like a door he'd been holding shut for a long time, finally, carefully opened. This afternoon? I said. This afternoon, he said. We walked back. Side by side. And his arm brushed mine once in the narrow path. Neither of us moved away. Chapter 6. The Blackthorn archive room smelled like time. Old paper and cedar and the particular dry stillness of a space where important things are kept. It was underground, accessible through a trapdoor in the longhouse floor that Kale pulled open without ceremony, descending a short ladder with the ease of someone who came here regularly. I followed. The room below was larger than I'd expected. Stone shelves from floor to ceiling. Wooden boxes, organized by decade. Rolled maps, sealed with wax. And at the far end, a section that was locked, a heavy iron cabinet with 2 separate locks. Kale went straight to the cabinet. He had both keys on a ring that he kept, I noticed, not on a hook or in a drawer. On his person. He unlocked both. Opened the doors. Inside, a set of bound volumes, dark red leather, and a stack of loose documents that had been handled many times, the edges soft with use. Here, he said. I approached. He stepped aside, giving me room. I began to read. An hour in, I found it. My hands stilled on the page. Cale, I said. He was at the other end of the room, reviewing something else, giving me space. He crossed to me. I held up the document. He looked at it. Something moved through his face. You knew, I said. Yes, he said quietly. This is a treaty draft. I looked back at the paper in my hands. Dated 18 years ago. 2 years into the conflict. I looked up. It's signed by your father. And it's signed by my Alpha. Yes, he said. It's a full peace agreement, I said. Defined borders. Arbitration framework. Shared resource zones along the river. I paused. It's everything both packs have been claiming to want for 2 decades. Yes. Why wasn't it implemented? Cale was quiet for a moment. Because 2 weeks after that document was signed, he said, there was an incident on the east border. 3 Blackthorn wolves found a cache of weapons buried half a mile into our territory. What kind of weapons? Anti-wolf. Specifically designed to be fatal during a shift. His voice was very level. The kind of weapons that are illegal under Interpack law and that sent a message that the peace agreement was, from Silvercrest's perspective, a tactical delay rather than a genuine resolution. I set the document down. My pack buried weapons inside your territory, I said. Someone in your pack, he said carefully. We were never certain it was a sanctioned action. But it ended the peace. It ended my father's ability to sell the peace to his council, Cale said. The hardliners used it to argue that Silvercrest couldn't be trusted. My father, he tried to hold it together for another year. And then he died. And you became Alpha, I said. At 19, he said. With a pack that was furious and a treaty that had been dead for a year and no proof of whether the weapons cache was sanctioned or a rogue action. I looked at him. 19 years old and inheriting this. Your ruthlessness, I said slowly. The reputation. Was necessary, he said. A 19-year-old Alpha inheriting a war cannot afford to seem uncertain. Something crossed his face. I became what the situation required. And now. He met my eyes. Now, he said, I have something worth being different for. The silence between us filled with the weight of everything those words meant. I turned back to the cabinet. There's more, I said. I need to find the weapons cache report. The original investigation. 3rd shelf, he said. Blue binding. I found it. And what I found inside stopped my breath entirely. Because the investigation report, written by Cale's father's beta, sealed and archived and clearly never intended for broad circulation, concluded that the weapons cache had not been placed by Silvercrest. It had been placed by a third party. A faction within the Blackthorn pack itself. Wolves who opposed the peace agreement. Wolves who had deliberately manufactured evidence of Silvercrest aggression to destroy the treaty. I read it twice. Then I turned to face Cale. You've had this for 18 years, I said. My father had it, he said. His jaw was tight. He chose not to act on it. The wolves responsible they were senior members of the pack council. Using it would have torn the pack apart from the inside. So instead you fought a war for 18 years. Instead, he said, my father made the best choice he could with an impossible situation. And then he died before he could find a better one. His voice was steady but under it, and I inherited both the war and the secret. The faction, I said. The wolves who planted the weapons. Are they? Some are still alive, he said. Still in my council. The air in the archive room felt very still. You've been leading a pack with saboteurs in your own council, I said. For years. I know who they are, he said. I've been managing it. Waiting for the right moment. And now. He looked at me with those silver eyes. Now I have documentation from the opposing pack's daughter, he said. A witness who can corroborate from outside. A third-party voice that my council can't dismiss as fabricated. He paused. And I have, potentially, a reason that supersedes all the political calculation. The child, I said. No, he said. Quiet. Absolute. I waited. You, he said. The word landed in my chest and stayed there. I turned back to the documents before he could see what it did to me. I need copies of all of this, I said. The treaty draft. The investigation report. The original arbitration requests. Take the originals, he said. I turned back. Cale. Take them, he said. Use them. That's more important than my having custody of them. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I started carefully gathering documents. He helped me stack them. Our hands overlapped once, briefly, accidentally, and neither of us moved immediately. The contact lasted perhaps 3 seconds. It felt much longer. If I take these forward, I said, without looking up from the documents, to a neutral mediator, to the Mountain Council, it becomes public. Everything. What Silvercrest did with the arbitration requests. What your people did with the weapons cache. The treaty that existed and was destroyed. I know, he said. Your saboteurs become exposed. I know. That's dangerous for you, I said. Inside your own pack. I know, he said, for the 3rd time. Something wry moved at the corner of his mouth. You're very thorough at outlining risks. It's my job, I said. Or it was. It still is, he said. I'd like, he stopped. Considered. If you're willing. I'd like it to be your job here. Officially. I looked at him. Chief Intelligence Coordinator, he said. Working between both packs during negotiations. If negotiations happen. That's an unusual position to offer someone who isn't even technically your. I stopped. My what? He said. I didn't answer. He didn't push. But something in the air between us had shifted, something that had been circling for 4 chapters of this story, something that both of us kept carefully, deliberately not naming. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking, he said. We climbed out of the archive into the warmth of the longhouse. And I carried the documents that could end a 20-year war against my chest. And tried very hard not to think about the warmth of his hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the window of my borrowed room and watched the moon clear the trees and tried to organize everything I knew into something that resembled a plan. The documents were wrapped in cloth under the bed. My father had 48 hours to buy. The Blackthorn saboteurs didn't know I existed yet, but when they found out that Cale had brought a Silvercrest wolf into the settlement, into the archive room, they would act. People who had murdered a peace agreement to protect their position didn't sit quietly when that position was threatened. Which meant I had less time than I'd thought. Which meant the 48 hours was probably more like 24. Which meant a soft knock at the door. I tensed. It's me, Cale said. I crossed to the door and opened it. He was in the hallway, dressed simply, hair still slightly wild from whatever he'd been doing before now, and he was holding 2 mugs. You're not sleeping, he said. Neither are you, I said. He lifted the mugs slightly. An offering. I stepped back from the door. He came in. Didn't sit on the bed or the chair. Leaned against the windowsill, giving me the choice of space. I sat on the bed. He handed me a mug. We drank in silence for a moment. Damon came to me an hour ago, he said. Okay, I said carefully. 2 of my council members requested an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning, he said. Agile and Soren. A pause. They're 2 of the 3 wolves named in the weapons cache investigation. My pulse ticked up. They know, I said. They know you're here. They don't know what you've seen. He held his mug in both hands. But they'll assume the worst. Which, from their perspective, is the truth. What will they do at the meeting? Challenge your presence. Challenge my judgment. His voice was very steady. Possibly challenge my authority to negotiate with Silvercrest independently. Can they? Technically? No. Practically. A pause. They have allies. It would be messy. I looked at him. You knew this would happen, I said. When you brought me here. Yes, he said. You chose it anyway. Yes. Why? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned his head and looked at me, fully, without deflection, with the kind of directness that didn't feel like aggression but felt like something rarer. Truth in its simplest form. Because I spent 6 weeks watching you carry something no one should carry alone, he said. And I decided that protecting my political position was not worth more than doing the right thing. A pause. My father made the other choice. He was a good man and he made the choice he thought was right, and it cost everyone. He set his mug down. I've spent years trying to understand if I would do differently, given the opportunity. And I said. And apparently yes, he said quietly. I do differently. The moonlight was very bright through the window. I looked at him, at this man who was supposed to be my enemy, who had rebuilt himself around a war he hadn't started, who had sat on a secret that could tear his pack open because the timing wasn't right, and who had decided that I was the right time. And I felt something I'd been refusing to name for 3 months rise up in my chest with sudden, undeniable certainty. Cale, I said. Yes, he said. When this is over, I stopped. Started again. When the documents are placed and the mediators are called and both packs are at the table and whatever happens happens, another stop. He waited. Patient. Giving me the time. When all of that is done, I said. I want to have that conversation. The real one. About what we are. Something moved through his face, controlled as always, but not entirely. Not quite. Okay, he said. That word again. A door opening. For now, I said, we deal with Agile and Soren. He nodded. Rose from the windowsill. At the door, he stopped. Sarah. I looked up. Whatever we are, he said, very quietly. Whatever the right word turns out to be. He paused. It's already true. Whether we have the conversation or not. He left. The door closed softly. And I sat in the moonlight with a mug of cooling tea and a heart doing something complicated and necessary. And realized that I hadn't thought about running in almost 2 full days. That was, I decided, the most significant thing that had happened yet. Inside the Blackthorn Council room, 2 wolves were already planning. And in 48 hours, everything Sarah had built, every careful step, every gathered document, every quiet conversation, would be tested. Not by an enemy across a border, but by the enemies already inside the walls. Chapter 7. The council room smelled like tension. I recognized it, the particular quality of air in a space where people have already decided what they want and are performing deliberation as a courtesy to process. I'd sat in enough Silvercrest pack meetings to know the scent of a conclusion dressed as a question. Cale had told me I didn't have to attend. I told him I was attending. He hadn't argued. That, more than anything, told me he understood. The council table was long and dark, the same heavy wood as everything else in the longhouse, worn smooth by decades of elbows and maps and the accumulated weight of decisions. 12 chairs. 8 occupied. Cale at the head. Joran to his right. Damon beside Joran with his ever-present notebook. And at the far end, Agile and Soren. Agile was older, late 50s, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had settled into permanent suspicion the way some faces settle into smiles. He reminded me of 3 specific Silvercrest elders whose names I had mentally filed under handle carefully. Soren was younger. Sharper. The more dangerous of the two, not because of size or experience but because of the particular brightness in his eyes that meant he was always calculating. He reminded me of Cale. That was not a comforting comparison. They both looked at me when I entered. Agile's expression, hostility dressed as concern. Soren's expression, nothing at all. Which was worse? I sat in the chair Cale had placed, not at the table's end, not in any position that could be read as claiming authority. Slightly to the side. An observer's position. A witness's position. Deliberate. Cale noticed. Something in his posture settled slightly. We'll begin, he said. Agile opened. He was good at it, the slow accumulation of reasonable-sounding concern layered over a foundation of pure territorial hostility. Each sentence individually justifiable. Collectively, an argument for removing me from the premises immediately. The presence of a silver-crest wolf in our settlement, he said, represents an unprecedented security risk. We have no guarantee of her loyalties, no formal agreement governing her presence, and no understanding of what information has already been. She's here at my invitation, Kale said. Calm. Final. Which is all the governance her presence requires. With respect, Alpha, Soren's voice was smooth. The Council has legitimate concerns about unilateral decisions that carry significant interpack implications. The Council's concerns are noted, Kale said. They're also outside your jurisdiction. Border negotiations are an Alpha's prerogative. This isn't a negotiation, Agile said. You've brought an enemy wolf into our home. She's not an enemy, Kale said. She's Silvercrest. She's also carrying the pack's future. Joran's voice entered the conversation quietly. Everyone at the table went briefly still. I kept my expression level. Joran glanced at me, apologetically, I thought. But he'd made the calculation that bringing it forward himself was better than letting Agile or Soren weaponize it. He was right. That didn't make it easier. Agile's eyes moved to me. Something shifted in them, a reassessment. Soren simply watched Kale. Is this true? Agile said. Not to me. To Kale. Yes, Kale said. And you intend to, what? Claim her? Accept a Silvercrest wolf as a packmate? As the mother of a future heir? Agile's voice was carefully modulated, not angry, not disgusted, but carrying something underneath that both were. The pack will not accept this. The pack, Kale said, will follow my lead. As they have for 4 years. You're asking them to accept an enemy in their home. I'm asking them, Kale said, to trust me. The way they have every other time I've made a decision they initially questioned. He let that sit for a moment. Or would you like to review the list? Because Damon keeps records. Damon, without looking up from his notebook, raised one hand slightly. A startled silence. Then one of the other council members, a woman I didn't know, mid-40s, who had been quiet until now, made a sound that was very nearly a laugh. Soren's expression didn't change. That stillness of his was doing something deliberate. He wasn't performing outrage like Agile. He was waiting, gathering information, deciding where to apply pressure most effectively. He looked at me. You were in the archive room yesterday, he said. Yes, I said. First word I'd spoken in the meeting. Several heads turned. For how long? He said. Long enough, I said. What did you read? I held his gaze. Quite a lot. Something shifted in Soren's face. Just a flicker. Just a fraction of a second's disruption in the careful blankness. But I'd been trained to track things through dense forest at night. I caught it. He knew. He knew exactly what was in that archive. He knew what I might have found. And he knew that if I had found it, and if I understood what it meant, his position in this pack was no longer safe. I watched him make a decision behind his eyes. Alpha, Soren said, redirecting his attention smoothly. I'd like to formally request that the Council be given time to review whatever documentation was accessed yesterday. As a matter of transparency. Denied, Kale said. With respect. With respect, Soren, the archive is mine. Everything in it is mine. Its contents are disclosed at my discretion. Kale's voice hadn't risen. It never rose. But it had acquired a particular quality, a density that made the air in the room feel slightly heavier. This conversation is over. The Silvercrest wolf remains. The Council will conduct itself accordingly. He rose. Everyone else rose. Meeting adjourned. Soren caught me in the hallway. Not aggressively, nothing so crude. He simply appeared beside me as I moved toward the exit, falling into step with a naturalness that was entirely performed. You found the weapons cache report, he said quietly. I kept walking. I'm curious, he said, what you intend to do with it. I intend, I said pleasantly, to use it to end a 20-year war. That's optimistic. I'm a tracker, I said. We deal in what's real. What's real, Soren said, is that report is 18 years old. Evidence degrades. Memories shift. Witnesses, a slight pause. Witnesses have other concerns. I stopped walking. He stopped too. I turned to face him. He was perhaps 4 inches taller than me and had 40 pounds of muscle. His eyes were the particular pale grey of someone who has never once let anything touch them all the way through. Is that a threat? I asked. It's an observation, he said. About the nature of old evidence. About the nature of old guilt, I said. Something behind his eyes. I don't know what you think you read, he said. I know exactly what I read, I said. And I know exactly what it means. And I know that you know too. I held his gaze. I also know that the worst thing you could do right now is make me feel unsafe. Because if I feel unsafe, I leave. And if I leave, I take the documentation with me. And if I take the documentation to a neutral mediator with an account of having been threatened inside Blackthorn territory, I paused. Well, that's a different story than the one you've been telling for 18 years. Soren looked at me. A long, measuring moment. You're not what I expected, he said finally. No, I agreed. I'm not. I turned and walked away. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart was somewhere near my throat. But my hands were steady. Cale found me 20 minutes later, sitting on the stone wall outside the longhouse, face turned up to the morning light with my eyes closed and my breathing very deliberate. Soren spoke to you, he said. Briefly, I said. What did he say? I opened my eyes. He made an observation about the nature of old evidence. Cale's jaw tightened. He threatened you, he said. Obliquely, I said. He's too careful for anything direct. I looked at Cale. He's not going to come at me. He'll come at you. Through the council. He'll build a case for removing you as alpha. Not on the grounds of what you've done, but on the grounds of what you're doing now. He'll frame it as emotional compromise. Bringing in an enemy, making decisions based on, I stopped. On personal attachment, Cale finished. Yes. He sat beside me on the wall. Not close. But close enough. He's not wrong, Cale said quietly. I looked at him. There is personal attachment involved, he said. Not apologetically. Just honestly. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But personal attachment isn't the same as compromised judgment. Your counsel won't see it that way. My counsel, he said, will see what I show them. Which is why we need to move faster. He looked at me. The Mountain Council. I can have a formal request for emergency mediation submitted by tonight. If you submit before I have my father's backing. I know. But Soren won't wait long. He'll call a challenge vote within the week if I don't act. He paused. I'd rather move from strength than spend time he's using to build a coalition. I thought about it. 24 hours had become something smaller. I need to talk to my father again, I said. Today. Besser can carry a message within the hour, he said. Not a message, I said. I need to see him. In person. I paused. And I need you to come with me. Cale went very still. You want me to go to Silvercrest territory, he said. To the boundary, I said. The Shepherd's Crossing. Neutral ground. With your father. Yes. A pause. Sarah, he said slowly. I know what I'm asking, I said. Your beta will lose his mind. Soren will use it. It's not that, he said. Then what? He was quiet for a moment. Your father, he said carefully. Knowing everything, knowing what happened between us, what came from it, he still came to the crossing yesterday. Yes, I said. He came as your father, Cale said. Not as an elder. Not with pack authority. He paused. If I go to meet him, that's a different thing. That's me presenting myself to your family. I understood then. What he was actually asking. Whether that was something I was ready for. Whether the word I hadn't said yet, the word for what we were, was something I was prepared to let my father see on his face. I looked at Cale Blackthorn. At this impossible man. At the situation we'd built together out of one desperate night and 3 months of separation, and something that apparently survived both. "Come with me," I said quietly. "I'll handle my father." Something moved through his face. And this time he didn't control it quickly enough. It was open, unguarded. For just one moment, behind all the alpha and all the strategy and all the carefully maintained control, just a man. Hoping. "Okay," he said. Chapter 8. We went at noon. Kale brought Joran, his beta, as witness and backup if something went wrong. I brought the documents, wrapped in oilcloth and carried in a satchel against my body where I could feel their weight as reassurance. The forest between the settlement and the Shepherd's Crossing was beautiful in midday light. I noticed that for the first time. 3 months of this situation had narrowed my vision to threat assessment and contingency planning. But here, moving through the blackthorn side of the forest with its different quality of light filtering through denser canopy, I noticed things. The way Kale moved through his own land. Easy, unhurried, alert without being tense. Like the forest recognized him. The way he checked on me, not obviously, not intrusively. A glance every few minutes. A slight adjustment of his pace when I was navigating rough ground without drawing attention to it. The way Joran, behind us, was deliberately making slightly more noise than necessary. Giving us space within earshot. Small things. Things that added up to something. We heard my father before we saw him. His footsteps. I'd known his footsteps my entire life. And beside them, others. More than one set. I stopped. Kale stopped beside me. "How many?" he said quietly. I listened. Counted. 3. Maybe 4. "Your father brought people." "He said he'd come alone," I said. Something cold moved through me. Had he been compromised? Had Kale found out? Had the 48 hours collapsed into? And then I heard the voice. Female. Older. Fierce. "Told you I'd walk myself, stop hovering." I exhaled. "It's my grandmother," I said. Kale turned to look at me. "Your grandmother," he repeated. "She's 92, I said. "She's also never once in her life been told what to do and not done the opposite." I paused. She must have made Dad bring her. "Is that," Kale seemed to be selecting his words, "good or bad?" "Unknown," I said honestly. "But she's not a threat." We emerged from the trees onto the bridge. My father was there, and behind him, leaning on a walking stick with the aggressive energy of someone who has decided that needing a walking stick is a personal insult from the universe, was my grandmother. Elia Vane. 92 years old, white-haired, sharp-eyed, and the oldest living wolf in Silvercrest territory. She had been a tracker before me. Before my mother. She had navigated 3 pack conflicts, 2 alpha transitions, and 1 territorial dispute that had nearly ended in open war. She looked at me. Then she looked at Kale. Her eyes, still sharp, still entirely present, moved over him with the systematic assessment of someone who had been reading people for 9 decades. The silence stretched. "Well," she said finally. "He's taller than the reports said." Beside me, Kale made a sound that was, I was fairly certain, a suppressed laugh. "Grandmother," I said. "Don't grandmother me," she said. "I've been waiting 3 months for someone to explain what's actually happening. Your father is too careful and your alpha is too political." She fixed me with a look. "You at least will tell me the truth." I crossed the bridge. I hugged her, carefully, because she was 92 and she would have been furious if I hadn't, and felt her thin arms hold me with a grip that was, even now, remarkably strong. "I'm okay," I said into her white hair. "I know you are," she said. "I told your father that weeks ago. He worried anyway." She pulled back and looked at me. Then past me at Kale. "Bring him over here." "Grandmother." "I'm not crossing that bridge," she said firmly. "My knees object. Bring him to me." I turned. Kale was watching this exchange with an expression that I realized, with some amazement, was entertained. Genuinely entertained. He crossed the bridge without ceremony, stepped onto the Silvercrest side, and stood in front of my grandmother with the same ease he'd stood in front of his council. My grandmother looked up at him. He looked down at her. You have your mother's eyes, she said. Something shifted in his face. You knew her, he said. Mara? Yes. Before she crossed the border. Before everything went wrong. My grandmother's voice was not sentimental. It was a statement of fact. She was a good woman. Smart. Brave enough to love across a line that other people drew. She held his gaze. You have her jaw too. Stubborn jaw. Mara had opinions and she kept them until the ground thawed. I've been told I'm similar, Cale said. I can see that. My grandmother tilted her head. The question I have for you is simple. And I'd like you to answer it the same way. Okay, he said. My granddaughter, she said, is the most capable wolf I've known in 60 years of knowing wolves. She is also carrying something that will change her life completely regardless of what she chooses. A pause. What do you intend? The bridge. The river. The noon light. Cale looked at my grandmother. I intend to stand beside her, he said. In whatever form she'll accept. For as long as she'll allow it. My grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me. He means it, she said. I know, I said quietly. Your father also means well, she said, glancing at my father who had stationed himself with diplomatic tact about 12 feet away. But he's going to try to find the political solution, and the political solution is not the right solution. She looked back at Cale. The right solution is the honest one. Are you prepared for honest? Completely, he said. Even if honest implicates your own people? Especially then, he said. My grandmother nodded once. Good, she said. Then sit down. Both of you. And let me tell you what I know about how this war really started. We sat on the bridge stones. My grandmother lowered herself carefully onto the wide stone rail, walking stick planted between her feet, and told us a story. A real one. Not the pack version. Not either pack's version. The version that an old woman carries when she's been paying attention for 92 years and has nothing left to lose by telling the truth. The hunting party, she said, 20 years ago. 3 blackthorn wolves dead at the south border. We listened. It wasn't an accident, she said. And it wasn't sanctioned. She looked at Cale. You know about the weapons cache. The one that destroyed the peace treaty. Yes, he said. Your investigation concluded it was a Blackthorn faction, she said. Yes. Your investigation was half right, she said. There was a Blackthorn faction. But there was also a Silvercrest faction. Working together. She paused. The hunting party that crossed your border 20 years ago, 3 of those wolves were from a group inside Silvercrest that had been coordinating with hardliners in your pack. Silence. Coordinating for what? I said. War, she said simply. Some wolves on both sides didn't want peace. Peace meant cooperation. Cooperation meant shared resources, shared territory, shared power. War was simpler. War was profitable. War kept specific people in specific positions of authority. The conflict was manufactured, Cale said slowly. Maintained, my grandmother corrected. The original dispute was real. But the escalation, the weapons cache, the failed arbitration, the continued skirmishing, all of it was actively maintained by a group of wolves across both packs who had more to gain from the war than from any treaty. The river ran beneath us. I looked at Cale. He looked at me. Soren, I said. And his counterpart on the Silvercrest side, my grandmother said. Who? I said. She looked at me. And then she said a name. A name I knew. A name I'd trusted. A name that explained, with sudden devastating clarity, why the 48 hours I'd been given were already compromised. Why the timeline was already shorter than I'd calculated. Why someone in Silvercrest had been pushing so hard to go public with my pregnancy as a political weapon before I could tell my own story. I felt the pieces land. All of them. At once. Cale, I said. My grandmother nodded. Cale Darren, she said, has been in communication with Soren for 11 years. Since he was 16 years old. Since he was recruited by the people who benefit from keeping this war alive. My best friend's ex-boyfriend. My Pax Beta. The man who'd stood at the well and said, "Your scent has changed." He knows, I said. He already knows everything. He's not trying to expose me as a political tool. My voice was very quiet. He's trying to prevent me from exposing him. My grandmother looked at me with those sharp, sad, 92-year-old eyes. Yes, she said. Cale was very still beside me. How long have you known this? He asked my grandmother. Carefully. Respectfully. But the question underneath, why is this the first time anyone is saying this out loud? Long enough to be ashamed of my silence, she said. I'm old, not blind. But speaking truth inside a system designed to punish truth is, she paused. It requires the right moment. It requires something worth the cost. She looked between us. You two. Together. This, whatever this is between you. This is the right moment. This is worth the cost. She looked at my father. Tomas, she said. You've been very quiet. My father crossed to us. He sat beside me on the stone rail, close and warm and steady. I've been listening, he said. And thinking. And I said. He looked at Cale. The two men regarded each other. The enemy Alpha. My father. The river between everything. The mountain council, my father said. If we bring this everything to them. All of it. My Pax role. Your Pax role. The coordination between Cale and Soren. He paused. It destroys both their positions. Yes, Cale said. It exposes Silvercrest leadership to significant accountability, my father said. Including, potentially, Alpha Dorian. Who may or may not have known. I know, Cale said. And you still want to go forward, my father said. We want to go forward, I said. Together. My father looked at me. Then at Cale. Something in his expression, the grief I'd seen 3 months ago, the exhausted love of a parent watching their child navigate a world larger than either of them, shifted. Changed into something different. Something that looked, cautiously, like hope. Then we have a problem, he said. Because Cale left Silvercrest territory this morning. And based on what your grandmother just told us. He's coming here, Cale said. Yes, my father said. To do what? I asked. To ensure, my grandmother said quietly, that the truth doesn't reach the mountain council before his version does. The noon light was very bright. The river was very loud. And somewhere in the forest behind us, moving through Blackthorn territory toward this bridge, the man who had spent 11 years maintaining a war was coming to end the threat of peace. Chapter 9. We moved fast. Cale made decisions the way I'd seen him do everything, with a concentrated efficiency that didn't look rushed even when it was. 3 quiet words to Joran, who vanished back into the trees immediately. 1 hand on my back, brief grounding, before he let me set my own pace. The documents, he said. I have them, I said, touching the satchel. Keep them on you. Don't set them down. Already decided that. We got my grandmother and my father back across the bridge. My father moving quickly, my grandmother with a dignity that refused to acknowledge urgency even while she moved faster than a 92-year-old had any right to. Go back to Silvercrest territory, I told them. Stay inside the border. Sarah, my father started. Dad. I met his eyes. Trust me. A moment. He nodded. I turned back. Cale was already scanning the tree line, not anxiously, but with the focused alertness of someone whose threat assessment was running at full capacity. Joran's positioning 3 wolves in the eastern approach, he said. If Cale crosses with backup. He won't, I said. Not yet. If he crosses with Silvercrest warriors, it's an act of war. He's too calculated for that. He might come alone, Cale said. He might, I agreed. Or with Soren's people. Soren's people are inside the settlement. We looked at each other. He's already coordinating with them, I said. He doesn't need to cross the border. He just needs to. A sound. To the left. We both turned. Cale Darren stepped out of the trees. Alone. Dressed for travel, not for combat, not for diplomacy. For speed. He stopped when he saw us. His eyes moved between me and Kale, cataloging, assessing, finding his angle in about 2 seconds. Then he smiled. The smile I'd known my entire life. Warm. Familiar. Perfectly calibrated. "Sarah," he said. "Thank God. We've been so worried." I looked at him. At the man I'd known since we were children. The man I'd trusted. The man who had been performing friendship and concern and pack loyalty for 11 years while feeding information to Kale's enemies. "No, you haven't," I said. The smile held. "Barely. Come home," he said. "You don't have to be here. Whatever he told you, whatever position he's put you in." "He hasn't put me in any position," I said. "I'm here by choice." "You're not safe here." "I'm safer here," I said, "than I've been in Silvercrest for 3 months." Kale's eyes moved to Kale. "You've done a good job," he said pleasantly to Kale. "Making her believe you're the reasonable one." "She's capable of reaching her own conclusions," Kale said. "Calm. Level. She's pregnant and isolated and—" "Don't," I said. Sharp enough that Kale stopped. I stepped forward. 2 steps closer to him. Close enough that his scent hit me, familiar in the worst way now, the way you recognize something you trusted and understand for the first time why it felt slightly wrong. "I know about the coordination," I said. "Between you and Soren. 11 years of it." Something happened to Kale's face. The warmth didn't disappear. It dimmed. And something colder showed through the gap. "I don't know what he's told you." "I know from a source that has nothing to do with him," I said. "I know about the weapons cache. I know about the failed arbitration. I know that you've been actively maintaining this war because the war serves people who benefit from keeping both packs in a state of permanent conflict." Kale looked at me. A long moment. Then the warmth dropped entirely. What replaced it was not monstrous. That would have been easier. What replaced it was simply cold. Practical. The expression of someone who had decided that the pretense was no longer worth maintaining. "You have no evidence," he said. "I have the archive documentation," I said. "And I have a witness. Your grandmother." He said it dismissively. "A 92-year-old woman who will be believed over you," I said, "every time." Kale's jaw tightened. "Sarah." His voice shifted, not warm again, not cold. Something that was reaching for something between them. Something that acknowledged, finally, that we'd known each other for a long time. "You understand what happens if you go forward with this. What it does to the pack. To Dorian. To everything." "What it does," I said, "is end a war. It destroys Silvercrest's credibility." "Our credibility is already built on a lie," I said. "I'd rather rebuild on truth." He looked at me. And then he looked at Kale. And something crossed his face that was not respect exactly. Something adjacent to it. The acknowledgement of a skilled opponent making an effective move. "The child," he said. "Is none of your concern," Kale said. Very quietly. Very finally. Kale made a decision. I could see it happen. The internal pivot, the reroute, the adoption of a new angle. "The Mountain Council," he said. "If you submit a formal request, both of you jointly, you need a Silvercrest elder to co-sign. Otherwise it's dismissed as a Blackthorn petition." He was right. That was protocol. Joint petitions from conflict packs required a co-signing witness from each side. I had my father. But my father was an elder, not a senior elder. For a petition of this magnitude, one that implicated both alpha councils, we needed someone with more standing. Someone whose name carried weight. Kale knew that. "I can co-sign it," he said. I stared at him. "Why?" I said flatly. "Because," he said, and for just a moment something crossed his face that might have been genuine. Something old and tired underneath the calculation. "The war wasn't my idea. I was recruited at 16. I was told it was about protecting the pack. It took years to understand what it was really about." He paused. And by then, a pause. By then I was in too deep to see the exit. "And now?" I said. And now you've found the exit, he said. And you're going to use it with or without me. He looked at me. I'd rather be on the right side of this when it's done. The forest around us was very quiet. Behind me, I could feel Cale's presence, not intervening, not pushing, letting me make this call. If you co-sign, I said, everything comes out. Including your role. Including the coordination with Soren. I know, he said. You'll face accountability. I know. From both packs, I said. There's no protected position in this for you. I know, he said, for the third time. I studied him. The man who had been my friend and my pack's beta and a double agent for 11 years. Who had grown up in the same settlement as me, who had once held my hand at my mother's funeral, who had also spent more than a decade feeding information to people who wanted to perpetuate suffering. Both things were true. Both things were real. I'll think about it, I said. Cale nodded. He looked at Cale one more time. Take care of her, he said. Quietly. Without irony. Then he turned and walked back into the trees. We watched him go. Cale came to stand beside me. Do you believe him? He said. I believe he's calculating, I said. I believe the calculation has landed on the right side this time. I paused. That's enough. For now. Cale was quiet. Then, you're remarkable, he said. I turned to look at him. He was looking at the tree line where Cale had disappeared, but as I turned, he turned too. And the expression on his face was, not controlled. Not performing equanimity. Just, present. Just looking at me with something he'd stopped trying to hide. Don't, I said softly. Don't what? Don't say something significant when we're in the middle of a crisis, I said. I won't be able to think straight. His mouth did the thing. Not quite a smile, but close. The closest he got. Noted, he said. After the crisis. After the crisis, I agreed. We turned back toward the settlement. And I did not think about his expression. I thought about it anyway. Chapter 10. Soren moved that night. We'd expected it. Cale's network inside the settlement was better than I'd realized. Lisa had her own set of contacts, the kind that run through healers' networks and kitchen conversations and the places where power forgets to be careful. She came to us at dusk with the specifics. Soren had called a private meeting. 5 council members. An agenda that wasn't written down anywhere. He's calling a leadership review, Cale said. Can he do that? I asked. Pack law allows a council majority to call for alpha review under specific conditions, Joran said. He'd been quiet most of the evening thinking. Evidence of compromised judgment. External influence on pack decisions. You bringing me here, I said to Cale. Yes, Cale said. How many does he need? 7 of 12, Joran said. He has 5 committed. He needs 2 more. And the timing? I said. If he calls the review before we submit to the Mountain Council, Cale said, the petition would be suspended pending resolution of internal leadership dispute. Which means weeks of delay, I said. While Cale uses that time on the Silvercrest side too. Yes, Cale said. I stood. Crossed to the window. The settlement below was quiet in the evening light. Families moving through end-of-day routines. Children called in from their play. The ordinary life of a pack that didn't know what was happening in their council rooms. A pack reflecting its alpha. What did I see, looking at them? Something that worked. Something that trusted. Something that had been maintained, through difficulty and pressure and the kind of political complexity that would have fractured a less coherent group, by one man who had been carrying it since he was 19 years old. I turned. I need to speak to the full council, I said. Cale looked at me. Sarah. Not as your, I stopped. Started again. Not as anything other than what I am. A Silvercrest wolf who has documentation and a story and a case to make. I held his gaze. Let me make it. Soren will tear you apart, Joran said. Not unkindly. Practically. Let him try, I said. Cale was very still. It's not your responsibility, he said quietly. It became my responsibility, I said. The moment I crossed your border. The moment I found that archive. I paused. The moment I decided to stay. Something moved through his face. He looked at Joran. Joran raised both hands slightly. Your call. Obviously your call. Cale looked back at me. Full council, he said. Tonight. Tonight, I agreed. The longhouse filled quickly. Word traveled the way it always does in small communities. Not through announcement but through the invisible channels of people who know something important is happening and tell exactly the right people. Within an hour, the council table held all 12 members. 6 additional wolves, senior pack members, respected voices, had been permitted to observe. Soren sat at the far end. His face was a neutral mask. Agile beside him looked less controlled. More openly hostile. I stood. I did not sit at the table. I stood at the side, the witness's position I'd claimed that morning, and I set the satchel on the floor beside me. Thank you for gathering, I said. I'll be brief. No one interrupted. 20 years ago, a conflict began between our packs that has cost both sides lives, resources, and the kind of trust that's very hard to rebuild. I kept my voice even. Level. Tracker's voice, observational, not emotional. Most of you understand the Blackthorn version of how that conflict started. I understand the Silvercrest version. Tonight I want to tell you the version that exists before either pack got hold of the story. I opened the satchel. I placed documents on the table. The treaty draft. The investigation report. The arbitration requests and their rejections. The correspondence between Alpha Councils that had been buried instead of published. One by one. These are your Alpha's documents, I said. From the archive. I've read them all. I've had them verified by my own pack's senior elder, a woman with 92 years of living through this conflict. I looked at the council. The war was maintained on purpose. By wolves in both packs who benefited from its continuation. I have names on both sides. I have documentation. I let that sit. I am going to the Mountain Council, I said. With or without your pack's support. But I'm asking for your support. Because Cale Blackthorn has been trying to end this war since he took the Alpha seat at 19. And he deserves a council that helps him rather than obstructs him. I looked at Soren. He looked back. The weapons cache report, I said. The one in your Alpha's archive. The one that names the wolves who planted evidence to destroy the peace treaty 18 years ago. I paused. Would you like me to read those names aloud? The silence in the room was absolute. Soren didn't move. Didn't blink. Because I will, I said. If that's what it takes. Another silence. And then, from the other side of the table, the woman who had nearly laughed at Damon's notebook gesture that morning, the council member who'd been quiet through both meetings, spoke. I'd like to see the documents, she said. Her name, I'd learned, was Raina. 20-year council veteran. The kind of wolf who had been watching and waiting for a long time. So would I, said another voice. Then another. Soren's jaw was very tight. He looked at Cale. Cale looked back. Something passed between them, the final exchange of two men who had been in opposition for years, finally reaching the end of it. I'll review the documents, Soren said. His voice was flat. Controlled. But under it, barely, just barely, something that sounded against all probability like relief. Perhaps, I thought, he too had been waiting for an exit. Perhaps none of them had wanted this forever. Perhaps that was the most human thing of all. The review took 2 hours. At the end of it, the council voted. 9-3. Support for joint submission to the Mountain Council. Support for Cale. Soren voted yes. I did not let my expression change when that happened. But under the table, where no one could see, my hand had found Cale sometime in the second hour. I wasn't certain who had reached first, and his thumb had moved once slowly across my knuckles. That was all. It was enough. After the council cleared, he found me on the porch. The night was cold. Bright stars. The kind of sky that looks like a promise. He stood beside me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, I said. I wanted to. Another silence. After the crisis, he said. I turned to look at him. His eyes were silver in the starlight. His face was open. The way it had been for a moment at the well, at the window, at every careful almost moment for the past 2 days. Open. Yes, I said. After the crisis. I think this qualifies, he said. The Mountain Council petition still has to be filed, I said. Tomorrow, he said. And Cale will co-sign or he won't, he said. By morning we'll know. And the baby is mine, he said, very quietly, very certainly. And you are, he stopped. You are whatever you choose to be. But you are not alone with this. Not anymore. I looked at him. At everything. At the impossible, improbable, undeniable weight of this. I was afraid, I said. For 3 months. I was afraid of everything, of what my pack would do, of what you'd want, of what the child would mean for the war, I stopped. I was afraid of what I felt. About you. Specifically. What do you feel? He said. The stars were very bright. The porch was very quiet. You know what I feel, I said. Yes, he said. But I'd like to hear it. I exhaled slowly. I feel, I said, like you were supposed to be my enemy. And like something in me knew from the very first night, that you weren't. I paused. I feel like the scariest part of this whole situation isn't the 2 packs or the elders or Soren or Cale or the Mountain Council. What's the scariest part? He said. That this is real, I said. What's between us? And it was real from the beginning. And I don't know what to do with something that real. He turned to face me fully. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. It just needs to be allowed. Allowed, I said. Yes. I looked at him. Okay, I said. He reached up, slowly, giving me every opportunity, and touched my face. His hand was warm and careful and entirely certain. My wolf went very, very still. Not the stillness of wariness. The stillness of recognition. Okay, he said back. And the word meant something completely different from every other time either of us had said it. It meant, yes. It meant, finally. It meant, I've been here the whole time. We stood on the porch under the stars. And the border between everything we'd been told we were. Dissolved. The Mountain Council would convene in 3 days. Cale Darren would co-sign the petition at dawn. Not because he was redeemed. Because he was practical. And because, somewhere underneath 11 years of choices he regretted, there was still a Silvercrest wolf who wanted his pack to survive. The war was not yet over. But it was ending. And in the Blackthorn Longhouse, a Silvercrest tracker held a document that could change everything. And the hand of the man who had given her his archive, his trust, and the open door of everything after the crisis. She held both. She did not let go. Chapter 11. The Mountain Council convened at dawn. Not metaphorically. Literally at dawn. It was their tradition, dating back 300 years. Important matters were heard at first light, when the mind was clear and the night's fears had not yet been replaced by the day's politics. The council hall sat at the peak of the neutral ridge, a wide, open structure built from pale stone, roofless at the center so that the sky was always present. Always witness. 12 seats arranged in a circle, 4 occupied by the Mountain Council's permanent arbitrators. The remaining 8 filled by representatives of the parties involved. We arrived as the sun crested the eastern peaks. Our side of the circle, Cale, Joran, Damon with his documentation, Raina, who had volunteered to represent the reformed Blackthorn Council position, and me. The Silvercrest side, my father. My grandmother, who had made the 3-hour journey to the ridge in a cart with the expression of someone deeply offended by the necessity of a cart. 2 senior elders who had, in the 48 hours since the bridge meeting, quietly shifted their positions. And Cale. He sat at the far end of the Silvercrest arc. Not near my father. Not near the elders. Slightly separate, which was honest. He'd sent a message at dawn, as Cale had predicted. 3 words, I'll be there. Alpha Dorian had not come. That was, in its own way, a statement. The lead arbitrator was a wolf named Sable, ancient, white-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had sat in this circle for decades and had stopped being surprised by anything humans or wolves could do to each other. She looked at our assembled group with calm, measuring eyes. "We'll begin," she said. The first hour was documentation. Damon presented the archive materials, systematically, thoroughly, with the precision of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment. The treaty draft. The investigation report. The arbitration rejections. The timeline of escalations. The Mountain Council's arbitrators received each document without expression. They read. They passed documents between themselves. They asked precise, clarifying questions. Sable asked Cale directly, "You've had the weapons cache investigation report for 4 years?" "Yes," Cale said. "Why wasn't it presented earlier?" "Because the wolves named in it held positions inside my council," he said. "Acting on it unilaterally would have fractured the pack's stability. I needed a moment when acting on it was worth the cost. And now that moment has arrived." "Yes," he said. Sable looked at him for a moment. "What changed?" Cale looked at me. Then back at Sable. "I found something worth protecting," he said. "Something that made the cost worth paying." Sable made a note. Then she turned to the Silvercrest side. My father presented the Silvercrest documentation, the arbitration requests from the Blackthorn side, confirmed as received and deliberately rejected. His voice was steady. Clear. The voice of a man who had spent a long time preparing to do something difficult and was finally doing it. When he finished, Sable said, "Elder Vane. You're presenting documentation that implicates your own pack's leadership in deliberate obstruction of peace negotiations." "Yes," my father said. "Including potentially the current Alpha." A pause. "The documentation speaks for itself," my father said carefully. "I'm presenting fact. The Council may draw its own conclusions about individual responsibility." Sable nodded. Then she turned to Cale. "You requested to make a supplementary statement," she said. "Yes," Cale said. He stood. He didn't look at me. He looked at the center of the circle, at the space that belonged to no one, the neutral ground at the heart of everything. 11 years ago," he said, "I was recruited by a faction operating across both pack borders. I was told the goal was pack security. Silvercrest stability. Protection against Blackthorn aggression." He paused. "I was 16. I was frightened. I was told that the wolves asking for my help were the only ones who understood the true nature of the threat." The Council listened. Over the years that followed, I was an active participant in maintaining communications between anti-peace factions in both packs. I passed information. I shaped narratives. I used my position as beta to delay, distort, or redirect pack policy away from genuine negotiation. He paused. "I am prepared to provide a full account of my actions and the actions of others in the faction, including specific incidents, dates, and the identities of every wolf involved." Silence. "In exchange," he said, "I ask for no protection. No reduced accountability. I ask only that the information be used toward a genuine resolution and not as political ammunition by either side." He sat. Sable looked at him for a long moment. "Noted," she said. Then she turned to me. "Sarah Vane," she said. "You're listed as a primary witness and co-petitioner." A pause. "You're also, I understand, in a position that places you at the intersection of both packs in a very personal sense." The circle was very quiet. I stood. I had thought about what I would say for 3 days. I had written versions of it and discarded them. I had practiced the tracker's voice, level, observational, stripped of emotion. Standing in that circle, with the dawn sky above me and my father to my left and Cale 3 seats to my right and my grandmother watching me from the Silvercrest Arc with those sharp, ancient eyes. I said none of the prepared versions. "I'm 23 years old," I said. "I spent 3 months lying to everyone I love because I was afraid of what the truth would cost." I paused. "The truth is, I crossed the border on a night when I had no other option. I was sheltered by the alpha of the pack I'd been trained to consider an enemy. And what I found there, in that shelter, in those conversations, in the hours that followed, was not what I'd been prepared to find. I looked at Sable. I found someone trying to do what was right inside a system designed to make that as difficult as possible, I said. I found a pack that reflected that effort. I found documentation that proved the war I'd grown up believing in was, at its foundation, a manufactured continuation of a real grievance that should have been resolved 20 years ago. I reached into the satchel. I also found this, I said. I placed the final document on the arbitration table. The one I hadn't shown anyone yet. The one I'd found in the deepest part of the archive cabinet, behind the red leather volumes, in a folder that had been placed there by Cale's father and sealed with a notation I hadn't understood until the third time I read it. Sable leaned forward. She picked it up. She read it. Something shifted in her expression. Infinitesimally. But I'd been watching her for 2 hours. I caught it. She passed it to the arbitrator beside her. And the next. The document moved around the council circle. When it reached the Silvercrest elders, one of them looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. When it reached my father, he read it with a stillness that told me he understood. When it reached Cale, he read it and went very still. When it reached Cale, he looked at it. And I watched something happen in his face that I had never seen before. That controlled, contained composure, the thing he'd built and maintained since he was 19 years old, cracked. Just slightly. Just at the eyes. What is it? Joran said beside him quietly. Cale didn't answer immediately. The document came back to Sable. For those who haven't seen it, she said, this is a private correspondence. Between the Blackthorn Alpha, Cale Blackthorn's father, and the Silvercrest Alpha of the same period. She paused. It's dated 1 week before the elder Blackthorn Alpha's death. She paused. It is a renewed commitment to the peace treaty, she said. Co-signed by both Alphas. With a clause specifically designating that in the event of either Alpha's death before implementation, the treaty would pass to their successor with full binding force. The circle was absolutely silent. If this document is authentic, Sable said, the treaty has been legally binding for 18 years. The war, one of the other arbitrators said slowly, has been conducted in violation of a standing peace agreement. Yes, I said. By wolves on both sides who knew the agreement existed and chose to suppress it. Another silence. Where did you find this? Sable asked me. In the Blackthorn archive, I said. In the deepest section. Behind 18 years of documents placed on top of it. Buried, Sable said. Yes, I said. She looked at Cale. Alpha Blackthorn, she said. Were you aware of this document? Cale looked at the treaty in Sable's hands. No, he said. His voice was very quiet. I was not. Your father hid it. My father, Cale said, died before he could implement it. And the wolves who killed the peace were apparently thorough enough to bury this before his funeral. The word killed hung in the air. Sable studied him. Then, are you making an allegation about the circumstances of your father's death? A long pause. Cale looked at me. I looked back. This was the part one hadn't told him about yet. The notation on the folder. In the event this is found after my death, know that the terms were met on both sides. Know that the obstacles were internal. Know that my son will know what to do. His father had known. Had known he might not survive the implementation. Had known that the people suppressing the peace were willing to go further than treaty violations. Had left this for Cale to find. Had trusted that eventually, his son would find it. I'm making no allegation, Cale said. I'm presenting documentation. Sable looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. And she turned to address the full circle. The Mountain Council will recess for 1 hour, she said. When we reconvene, we will discuss the terms of the peace treaty's formal implementation. She rose. Everyone rose. And 20 years of war, the manufactured, maintained, deliberately perpetuated conflict that had cost both packs more than anyone had been willing to count, took its first genuine step toward ending. In the recess hour, I found Cale at the edge of the ridge. He was standing with his back to the council hall, looking out over the valley below where both pack territories stretched into the distance, separated by the river, by the border stones, by 2 decades of accumulated damage. I stood beside him. We were quiet for a long moment. "You found it and you didn't tell me," he said. "I found it and I needed to present it to the council without your reaction shaping anyone else's understanding of it first," I said. "It needed to land clean." A pause. "That was right," he said. "That was correct." Another pause. "I'm not angry." "I know," I said. He stopped. "I know," I said again quietly. He turned to look at me. His eyes were not wet. He would not have that, I thought. Not here. Not in front of the valley. But the redness at their edges told me what the controlled expression wouldn't. "He left it for me," he said. "Yes," I said. "He knew." "He knew," I agreed. "And he trusted you'd find it. Eventually." "It took someone from the enemy pack to find it," he said. "It took someone who was looking with fresh eyes," I said. "And who had a reason to look all the way to the back." He turned back to the valley. I let him have the silence. After a while he said, "When this is done." "Yes," I said. "I want," he stopped. Began again. "I know you haven't decided. About where you'll live. About what role you'll take. About," he stopped again. "Kale," I said. He looked at me. "Stop managing it," I said. "Stop calculating the ask against the risk of rejection." I held his gaze. "Just say what you want." He looked at me for a long moment. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as a political arrangement. Not as a symbol of the peace. Not because of the child." He paused. "I want you to stay because this, you here with me, is the only thing in 4 years of carrying everything that has felt like rest." The wind off the peaks was cold and clean. I pressed my shoulder against his arm. He was very warm. "Ask me again," I said. "After it's done. When neither of us is in the middle of anything." "Why?" he said. "Because I want to say yes when I can mean it completely," I said. "Without any of this in the room." His arm moved, slowly, carefully, around my shoulders. I let him. "After," he said. "After," I agreed. We stood on the ridge with the valley below us and waited for the hour to pass. Together. Chapter 12. The treaty implementation took 3 days. Not because it was complicated. The original document was remarkably clear, drafted by 2 alphas who had clearly anticipated that clarity would be essential if the thing was ever to survive the people who opposed it. But because people needed time. Packs needed time. 20 years of identity built around an enemy doesn't dissolve overnight, no matter how compelling the documentation. On the first day, Alpha Dorian arrived at the Mountain Council. He came alone. Without his guard, without his senior elders, with a stillness about him that told me he'd spent the previous day making decisions he'd been avoiding for a long time. He sat across the table from Kale. The 2 men looked at each other. Dorian was 63 years old and had been Alpha for 30 years. Kale was 27 and had been Alpha for 8. The gap between them was not only years. "I rejected the arbitration requests," Dorian said. "Not to Sable. To Kale. I knew what they were. I knew what they'd require." Kale said nothing. "I was protecting my position," Dorian said. "I told myself it was about the pack. It wasn't." A pause. "It was about me." A silence. "I can't give back 20 years, Dorian said. "I know that. I'm not asking for absolution." "Then what are you asking?" Kale said. Dorian looked at him. "Permission to sign," he said. "As the current acting Alpha of Silvercrest. Before the Council removes that authority." He paused. "I'd rather the peace happen with my signature on it than after it." Kale looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Sable. Sable looked at the Mountain Council's arbitrators. A quiet exchange. Then she nodded. Dorian signed. Kale signed. Sable witnessed. And on the second line of the signature block, the line that read secondary witness, neutral party, Sable looked at me. "You are the petitioner," she said. "Would you like to witness?" I looked at the document. At the pen she held out. I thought about the border stones. The night I'd crossed them. The night everything had changed. I took the pen. I signed. On the second day, the implications settled in. The faction wolves, Soren on the Blackthorn side, Kale and 2 senior elders on the Silvercrest side, and 6 more across both packs whose names Kale provided in his full account, faced the council's accountability process. It was not a trial in any formal sense. It was quieter than that. More comprehensive. The kind of accounting that happens when everyone in the room understands that punishment isn't the point. Prevention is. Soren sat with a straightness that I had to respect even now. When his account was complete, when the council had heard everything, he looked at Kale. I thought I was protecting the pack, he said. In the beginning. I know, Kale said. Later I was protecting myself. I know that too, Kale said. You've known for years, Soren said. Yes. And you waited. Yes. Soren was quiet. Why? He said. And under the blankness, something genuine. Something that had been there a long time, waiting for someone to explain the thing he couldn't explain to himself. Because destroying you wouldn't have ended anything, Kale said. It would have just changed the shape of it. A pause. And because I remembered that you mentored me. When I was 19. When I had no idea what I was doing and I was terrified to let anyone see that. He paused. You were good at that. Whatever else you became. Soren looked at him. For the first time since I'd met him, the blankness dropped entirely. What was underneath it was grief. Pure and old and long suppressed. He looked away. And said nothing more. On the third day, I went home. Not permanently. Not yet. But I needed to. My father met me at the Silvercrest border, at the same crossing point where I'd run, bleeding and afraid 3 months ago. He was alone. He'd arranged it that way. I crossed from Blackthorn territory into Silvercrest and felt both things at once, the familiar comfort of home scent and the strange new awareness that home had expanded, that I now belonged to more than one place, that the border under my feet was no longer a line between enemy and ally but simply a geographic marker between 2 territories learning to share a valley. My father held me. I held him back. The pack is, he started. I know, I said. It'll take time. Some of them are angry, he said. About what came out. About Dorian. About Kale. Are they angry at me? I asked. A pause. Some, he said honestly. Okay, I said. Mira isn't, he said. Something in my chest moved. Where is she? I said. My father gestured. And Mira came around the bend in the path, as if she'd been waiting exactly there, exactly long enough to give my father and me our moment, and looked at me with those green eyes that had known me since I was 7 years old. She looked at me. She looked at my midsection. She looked back at my face. You owe me, she said, an extremely long conversation. I laughed. The first real laugh in 3 months. She crossed to me and hugged me with the force of someone who has been worried for a very long time and is choosing to express it as physical compression. I knew something was wrong, she said into my hair. I know, I said. I knew it wasn't just tired. I know. I'm going to be very annoying about this for at least a week, she said. I know, I said. I'm looking forward to it. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were bright. Is he, she started. He's, I stopped. Tried to find the word. The right one. He's real, I said. Whatever else he is. He's real. Mira held my gaze. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. That's enough. For now. We walked back into Silvercrest territory. The trees smelled like lavender and pine sap and river water. Like home. And underneath it, faintly, the way a compass needle knows north even in a dark room, I could feel the pull of the other direction. Of the man on the other side of the border. Waiting. As he'd said he would. I stayed for 3 days. I talked to Mira, the long conversation, all of it the real version. She cried once, briefly, and told me I was an idiot, and then held my hand for 2 hours while I told her everything, and at the end said, he sounds like what you needed. even if everything else is complicated. I talked to the pack wolves who were willing to talk. Sat in the communal space, answered questions honestly, absorbed the anger of the ones who had it without performing either guilt or defiance. Just steadiness. Just, this is what happened and this is why and here we are. I talked to Dina, the healer, who examined me with professional thoroughness and told me the pregnancy was progressing well and that I had excellent instincts for rest and nutrition and should perhaps apply those instincts to stress management. I talked to Alpha Dorian. That conversation was the hardest. He was diminished, not physically, but in the way that a person is diminished when the version of themselves they'd built their identity around is dismantled. He was still Dorian. Still capable, still present. But the 30 years of alpha authority had been peeled back to reveal something more ordinary. More human. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I said. "I don't expect. I don't need anything from you," I said. Not unkindly. Just honestly. The council will determine the accountability. That's not mine to manage. I paused. What I wanted to tell you is that the pack is going to be all right. They're angry. They're confused. But they're resilient. Dorian looked at me. "You sound like a leader," he said. "I sound like a tracker," I said. "It's my job to know the terrain." He nodded slowly. And I left. On the morning of the 4th day, I packed a bag. Not a large one. Not permanent. But deliberate. My father helped me, which was the most his particular form of love would ever say out loud. "Come back often," he said at the border. "Often," I promised. "Bring him sometimes," he said, with the careful, chosen casualness of a man making a very significant offer. I looked at him. "Dad," I said. "He has his mother's eyes," my father said. "And his mother was a good woman. I knew her briefly. Before everything." He paused. I think, given the chance, he would be someone worth knowing. I crossed the border. And walked back toward Blackthorn territory. Toward the pine resin and the rain-on-stone scent that my wolf had apparently decided was home. I walked through the forest in the early morning, and the trees were different here. Denser, darker, older, and beautiful in a way I hadn't let myself notice until now. I walked through the settlement and people nodded. Some of them smiled. Small things. But small things accumulate. I went to the longhouse. He was at the table, maps and documents and the never-ending logistics of a pack transitioning out of wartime posture into something new, something that required different kinds of planning. He didn't hear me come in. I stood in the doorway and watched him work. His hair was slightly wild. He had 3 documents open simultaneously and was making notes in the margin of one while reading another. He'd clearly been at this for hours. He looked concentrated, real, present, like someone who had a great deal to do and was doing it because it mattered. My wolf was entirely certain. I crossed the room. He looked up as I approached. Something in his face, the controlled surface, the ever-present composure, opened. Just like that. Like I was the thing that made it possible to stop performing. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," I said. "I know," he said. He stopped. "I'm glad." I set my bag on the floor. Sat in the chair across from him. "You asked me something," I said. "On the ridge." He went very still. "I asked you to wait," I said. "Until it was done. Until I could answer completely." "I remember," he said. I looked at him. At those silver eyes that had caught moonlight on a desperate night 3 months ago and had not, since then, ever looked at me like anything other than something worth protecting. "It's done," I said. "Or done enough." "And," he said. The longhouse was quiet around us. Morning light through the windows. The smell of the settlement waking up. 2 packs beginning the slow, difficult, necessary work of learning to exist without a war between them. "And yes," I said. "To all of it. Here. With you." I held his gaze. "That's my answer." He looked at me for a moment. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. Not dramatically. Not performing anything. Just took it. Held it. Like it was where it belonged. "Okay," he said. And this time, The word was the most complete thing either of us had ever said. N.